in Berkeley, and they invited me to join. So I showed up, and I had heard about one of our representatives in California who was saying that he had made promises that he would pass policy to stop the war in Yemen, but he had been slow walking the process and had not been responding to requests for a meeting. And I was infuriated because I know that Yemen can't wait. You know that Yemen can't wait. So why is this congressperson waiting? And then I asked, well, we had talked about it, and I said, well, we could show up to his office and protest. And so I called my cousins, the ones in the photo here, and I said, come meet me at this park with Isaac. And they showed up an hour later, and we had strategized about what we can do to get this representative, Rokana, by the way, to move the right way on this issue. And so we had thought, okay, well, we can go the next day and protest at his office. We can show up with signs that say, Yemen can't wait, give us a date. And then Isaac said, well, tomorrow is the 4th of July. So maybe you don't want to go on a holiday. Maybe you want to go during business hours while there's people in the office. So we decided to go the following Friday, a few days after this meeting. And this was my first time ever organizing a rally. It was definitely a new experience, but I knew it had to be done. And so me and my cousins and friends post a flyer online, and then 20 people show up to this rally. We're holding signs that say, Yemen can't wait, give us a date. And we're chanting outside the office of Representative Rokana in California, his district office in San Jose. And then that same day, they reply to Isaac and they give him a meeting to meet about the Yemen War Powers Resolution, which was the policy that we were hoping for. And I was invited to this meeting. And so this was my first time meeting with anybody who worked in Congress, let alone an actual congressperson. And so it really showed me the power of advocacy. And so this is the photo of the rally we ended up doing shortly after. This is the second rally I ended up organizing with my cousins. And it was outside the office of Nancy Pelosi in San Francisco. And way more people showed up this time. It was very empowering to see so many people show up for Yemen. And from there, my activism only grew. I became an organizer with Action Corps, and I launched my own platform called Hands Off Yemen to advocate for peace in Yemen. And over the next 3 months, we organized hundreds of people across the Bay Area in protests like this one to take action and sign petitions and call their members of Congress. So my journey from selling cookies to meeting with Congress has been very empowering. It's shown me the incredible impact we can have when we take action. And although Yemen's struggle is far from over, we all are making a difference. So this is the end of my story about how I came to this work. I will pass it to Isaac now to tell his story about building the national coalition that I was so floored by and continue to be floored by. So go ahead, Isaac.
Hi there, everyone. Let's see. We can move to the next slide. There we go. If folks would be so kind, if you're able to write in the chat anything that stood out for you from what Neda just shared. It's always great to see what resonates and read your feedback. Um, Thanks for folks who have shared already in the chat. So this is a picture of me and some friends shouting at as the Saudi crown prince, the Saudi dictator Mohammed bin Salman, was driving by in a motorcade in New York City. And I wanted to share this photo with you because sometimes having an authoritarian leader um, in town can be a galvanizing force for movement building. And we have an opportunity um, in the coming years to do that. So while there's a lot at stake and a lot of uncertainty in our country, we have uh, movement building is one of the things that we get to do. And what we're doing right now is part of that, where we talk to each other from different groups. So I'm really excited to connect more with the New Hampshire Peace Action. Did I get it right, or is it Peace Action New Hampshire? I uh, I was gonna study up on that, and then before joining in tonight. But feel free to correct me here as I go along. Um, so let's go to the next slide, Neda. So speaking of coalition building, how did we actually, and I should first of all say that the the title of this presentation that you might have seen something about ending how we ended the US-Saudi war on Yemen. And right now, the US has been bombing Yemen. The US has been directly bombing Yemen since January. The thing that we changed, that we helped change, is that Saudi Arabia stopped bombing Yemen. Saudi Arabia had been bombing Yemen for many years. And then in April 2022, they stopped. And I'm going to tell a story about how we helped get Saudi Arabia to stop bombing Yemen. Um, Saudi Arabia has continued that blockade, and the U.S. is very much complicit in this. The U.S. sees the Houthis as Iranian proxies. You know, I would counter that by saying then that the Saudis are U.S. proxies, but that's not how you read about the Saudis in the media. It doesn't say every time you see Houthis, it says the Iranian-backed Houthis, but you don't see every time you see Saudi Arabia in the newspaper in the United States, you don't see the United States-backed Saudis. Well, that's the fact of the matter is that right now it's the U.S. is directly bombing Yemen. Um, so there's continued work for us to do, but we did score a really important victory in getting a bipartisan resolution through a divided Congress. The Democrats controlled the House, the Republicans controlled the Senate, and we got this legislation through that divided Congress, a Yemen War Powers Resolution. So that's what I want to talk about here with this coalition building. Oh yeah, and the UAE has also been very much involved in this war. Maybe we can, well, actually, let me show you who these groups are in this screen. On the left is a group of grassroots peace activists here actually in Brattleboro, Vermont. In the middle is a group of Yemeni-American leaders in New York City. And on the right is a humanitarian organization, Oxfam, that has been involved in this work. Maybe we can hide the screen so that I can just see everybody better. So when I first heard about the war in Yemen, it was in the context of addressing hunger issues around the world. And we heard about the scale of the war, the number of people who are being affected, and then also the role of the US. I thought, huh, kind of like Neda had that moment where she went from selling cookies in San Francisco to raise money. I Someone from UNICEF was visiting our Action Corps meeting and presenting about various hunger crises, and she was talking about this war in Yemen, and she was saying we could donate $3 to help vaccinate children. And I thought there must be something more than we could do. And so we started talking to the grassroots peace activists who didn't actually know who their members of Congress were, but they knew all the details about the war. And they weren't at all connected to the Yemeni-Americans in their city, but it was in New York City that I was talking to. They had this weekly peace vigil for Yemen. So I got a couple of them to go to Brooklyn to talk with Yemeni-American community leaders. And pretty soon we were doing demonstrations and they didn't know about the Yemen War Powers Resolution, but we started doing meetings with members of Congress. And then when they wouldn't respond to our requests, we started demonstrating in front of their offices. And what we pretty soon had was a group of NGOs, Yemeni-American peace activists, or Yemeni-Americans who weren't necessarily peace activists, but like Neda cared about their families back home and where they're from, and peace activists, longtime peace activists, who started cooperating and working together. And it was a very powerful coalition. And so that's maybe we can look at the next slide. And I share this with you, this story, to hopefully give we spend so much time in struggle that Amy has encouraged us to look at what's been effective. So, well, how did we do this? How do we get a bipartisan resolution through a divided Congress? Well, this was Eliot Engel. and he became the chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. And we showed up in front of we tried calling his office asking for a meeting, we couldn't get one. So they didn't respond to our phone calls. So we showed up in front of his office a week before his primary election. And you can see there were one, two, three, four. Oh, I think there were about 8 of us there. And we timed it so it was half an hour before his staff got to work that we showed up there. And we had these signs, Rep. Engel, stop fueling famine in Yemen. Because he had said absolutely nothing about the U.S. role in which was providing weapons and military support and the mid-air refueling of these fighter jets. The U.S. would, in the middle of the air, would provide all this fuel to the Saudi fighter jet, and then it would go and drop bombs on a farm or a water treatment facility plant or hospital. So we did this demonstration, and the next month, there we were meeting with him in the middle, and we got an hour with this guy. And what I was struck by was seeing how he was clearly affected by what we were sharing and how he was moved. And I had been told by his staff, oh, it's very unlikely that the congressman or the chairman or whatever ranking member at that point of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, very unlikely that he would co-sponsor that Yemen War Powers Resolution to stop unauthorized U.S. participation in the war. Congress never authorized. No, he wouldn't do that. We'd be very surprised if he did that. Well, right after we met with him, guess what? He joined on as a co-sponsor. And then he gave a floor speech in support of it on the floor of the House of Representatives. It was a very powerful experience for me to be able to see how just that group on there on the left was able to get that meeting, and then through that hour with him, we were able to influence him. So that was important, and that once we had him on board, it was easier to get other members. So let's go to the next slide. We went down to Jerry Nadler's office. He was at that point, the ranking member of the House Judiciary Committee in Manhattan. He's from Manhattan. And there was this media company that was focused on the UN that you can see that big fancy billboard in the back. Well, that's on the side of a truck. And they were focused on the United Nations. And I said, they connected with us because they wanted us to hold their signs. And I said, the UN, it's Congress that really needs to act. The US has so much power globally, we really need this congressional action. Can you drive your vehicle by the congressional offices while we're there? And they said, okay. So we sent this picture actually of us, and we sent it up to Jerry Nadler's staff, who we couldn't get a meeting with on this issue. And within 2 days, he was a co-sponsor. And then we sent these pictures also on to Nydia Velasquez. She was a ranking member of House Appropriations. Well, before we even got to her office, she had already co-sponsored. It was in 24 hours, she signed on. She knew what was coming. And so we got there and we turned it into a press conference celebrating her leadership. And we were glad to do that because her staff gave a speech and then it was easy to get the other members once we had them on. We showed up in front of Nancy Pelosi's office and there was a bunch of Yemeni-American activists out there. And within an hour of that rally, at that point, the House Minority Leader, Nancy Pelosi, had co-sponsored the Yemen War Powers Resolution. Once she was on there, it was the floodgates were open. We couldn't stop. You couldn't even stop that bill if you had tried. And we got it through the House. And then we got it through both. We had it through both the House and the Senate. And that let's go to the next slide. Yes. So this resolution helped prevent Saudi Arabia from bombing a key Yemeni port. So on the eve of that vote in the Senate, there was an agreement arrived at in Stockholm, the Stockholm Agreement, which helped prevent the key Yemeni port where a huge amount of the goods in Yemen come in from getting bombed. It's clear that vote in the Senate, just that the fact that the Senate was voting on it, played a role in getting that agreement. And then once we had used that tool of the War Powers Resolution, which is related to the Constitution, Article 1 of the Constitution that says Congress has the power to declare war. And Article 2 has some talks about presidential executive powers, but Article 1 is about Congress and talks about Congress's war powers. So by using that tool, getting Congress to use that tool, it made way for an Iran War Powers Resolution to be introduced and voted on in January 2020. So it's like if you use a tool, it's more likely, it reminds people of the tool and can be used for other situations. And ultimately, we helped increase the cost to Saudi Arabia, their PR cost of continuing to bomb the poorest country in the Middle East. So let's see if there's what the next slide says. Yeah. Um, Amy, shall we continue these slides, or do you want us to pause for questions?
Usually this is about when we take questions, so maybe we should at least take a few and see how it goes. And if it seems like people are asking about what you have on there, you can go back.
That sounds great.
Okay, so folks, between chat and raised hands, it's your turn to ask some questions. And do use the react button hand, otherwise I can't promise that I'll see it. I'm going to ask, are folks here aware of this campaign? Who here participated in the push for the Yemen War Powers Resolution? Okay.
Right.
Yeah. But for some, that means this is a new story, which to me, it is really important for us to look at when we have, make a difference. I'm going to have Moji speak. Go ahead, Moji.
Hi, Amy, and thank you. And thank you for Isaac and Sister Neda. Salaam alaikum. I'm from Iran. And and of course, Iran, through the Houthis, has been a major part of this conflict. So I want you to please talk about that. And also, in terms of movement building, Amy knows about, I have spoken here at these conversations about the chambers of compassion versus chambers of commerce in order to build a movement of movements. So I would love to, first of all, take this opportunity to invite you, Isaac, and also Neda, to a meeting of a most recent project I've started called the Peace-Seeking Iranian Veterans. Live conversations with people inside Iran, and including Iranian veterans for peace. So anyhow, that's my formal invitation for sometimes in February, and now talk about Iran and what do you see in terms of especially the recent partial rapprochement between the Saudis and the Iranians and implications for Yemen and for the Houthis. Thank you.
Shall I go ahead and address this question, or did you want to take multiple questions first, or how would you like to structure it?
Go ahead with this one.
Okay, great. Well, in terms of thank you so much for the question. Thank you for the work and for the invitation. Yeah. So the first thing is that in terms of Iran's involvement, this is not an area that I have studied. I very much focused on what is the U.S. role, because Action Corps is focused on U.S. policies. But my understanding from conversations with experts on this topic is that there's been a shift, and that actually it's been a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. So that the more that the US has armed and aided Saudi Arabia in this war, the more that Iran has supported the Houthis. That this is the, and if you want de-escalation and peace, the way to achieve that is generally not by providing more military assistance. So we've gotten more of what the US has complained about in terms of Iranian involvement. I will say it was hopeful to me that in the spring of 2022, yeah, I'm just making sure that I have the dates right. After so many years of this conflict dragging on and on, I have to remember which years these things happened. But in the spring of 2022, there was this warming of or thawing of diplomatic relations between Saudi Arabia and Iran, which was a breakthrough. And you may recall that the Biden administration's response was that they were blindsided by this and they were upset about it. I mean, they were upset that these two regional adversaries were having a thawing of their relations because they hadn't been involved with that. It was brokered, I believe that it was brokered by Beijing, or Beijing was very much been involved in this, and the US saw this as a real competition. Our perspective is that if there's something that can be good for saving lives and uplifting humanity and achieving peace, that's a good thing that we want to celebrate. Anything you want to add, Neda, or there are other questions?
There are other questions, but let's see if Neda would like to say anything. No, okay, doesn't want to add. Okay, thanks. Now, okay, there are a few different sort of threads going on here. What I would like to start with is this question: how usual or unusual is this positive response, or turnaround, especially given that the mobilization on the ground was relatively few in number, and what factors went in to get to the victory? Is that clear, that question? Yeah, okay.
And Neda, please feel free to chime in. I know you joined in later. We can, and then the next part of the presentation is just to show that we continue to advocate for a new Yemen War Powers Resolution, because the first one, while it made a difference, the US has continued to provide military support to Saudi Arabia, even though even though the mid-air refueling stopped. Trump stopped that when this resolution was coming up. He just stopped it, and he said, oh, it was too expensive or whatever, but it was very clear that we put the political pressure on him. But there's continued US continues to service the Saudi fighter jets, and Saudi Arabia continues to implement this deadly blockade. So I want to be really clear that this conflict continues, and it's complex, but that there was really important victory in getting this resolution through, and it did make a difference on the ground. So what were the factors? That was the question. What were the factors that led to the success? And one of them was that coalition building. The fact that we brought together these diverse groups that had not been in touch with each other. We're talking about activists who didn't know who their members of Congress were. And then we're getting all sorts of meetings with their members of Congress once they found out, like, oh, there's actually a bill in Congress that's very much what we want. And And the NGOs that were focused, they were based in DC, and they go between their homes, their offices in Capitol Hill. And they forget that there's the rest of the country. The most of the people in the United States live outside of Washington, DC, Maryland, and Virginia area, right around DC. And that there's power, that we have, we set up a meeting with Senator Schumer. We had an hour with a senator, and we had all these New York, or this is when I was living in New York, and we had these New York organizations. We had a big NGO say, "Oh, well, why didn't we get an invitation to the meeting?" And I said, "Well, do you have a presence in New York?" Well, no, they didn't have a on-the-ground presence in New York because it was for constituents, constituent groups. And that's how we got the meeting. They had been trying to get meetings with the majority leader or minority leader, whatever he was at that point. But it was that constituent power. The other thing is that we were very strategic. We focused our energy, Action Corps focused all of our energy on this particular campaign. And it was very energizing and very helpful to be able to say, to put this energy. And we had a campaign, we had a bill that actually was bipartisan, that had a chance. There was a lot, there was also, there were some events that happened that also made it possible to get a lot of congressional support. Do you remember Jamal Khashoggi, the Washington Post journalist? He was assassinated by Saudi Arabia. There was congressional outrage about that. It broadened the anger about Saudi Arabia. So a lot of we took advantage of that anti-Saudi sentiment in Congress right then. But we had a resolution. We'd already done the work. We'd already gotten Eliot Engel, from the House Foreign Affairs Committee, on the bill. So we were ready. So a lot of it is about being ready for when those moments of opportunity come along. So it wasn't just hard work, and it wasn't just good luck, but it was some combination of the two. And the willingness also to realize that different groups had different strengths. So some of us are really, like New Hampshire Peace Action, really, y'all have a lot of experience connecting with congressional offices. But you might have friends from organizations that are up for showing up at a key congressional office, all with the same message, all directed to that same member of Congress. Because I go to a lot of grassroots peace demonstrations, everybody has their own sign, and sure, they're on the same topic, but it's not coherent. It's not, if you took a picture, it wouldn't be clear to that member of Congress, oh, these people are really focused on me. They're really focused on me doing something. And I don't want that to get in the press. When we were going to meet, after we met with Senator Schumer, we were asking him to make a statement about this U.S. participation in the war. Well, he wasn't going to do that. I mean, he said, sure, I'll consider it, whatever. Months went by. And it was like, okay, great. We had the access to the senator, but access isn't the same as influence. And so then we said, we had done various rallies in front of his office, and we called the staff up and said, there's some people in our coalition who are really frustrated. It was just a couple days before Thanksgiving, and they're talking about making signs that say, with a hashtag, so it's easy to find on the internet, "No famine while Schumer feasts." That's really not the message that we want. We would much rather have a more positive message, like, "Thanks, Chuck," or something like that. What do you think? Have any thoughts about what we should tell these activists? They said, "Well, we'll get back to you. Let's see what we can do. Do you think can you get them to hold off for a little bit?" And I said, "Yeah, sure. I'm sure they would be open to whatever you have, to hearing from you." I never got so many calls from a congressional office in one day. They actually ran the language by us to ask if we were comfortable with what they were going to put out in a statement. And they put out a statement that night saying Senator Schumer opposes weapons and military support for the Saudi Arabia in their war in Yemen. So our willingness to flex our muscles a little bit but not overdoing it. We had a relationship with the office. We had credibility. But that willingness to try different tactics did make a difference.
Neda, did you want to add anything?
I think Isaac covered it beautifully, but I had put in the chat that the movement was quite large. This coalition expanded globally, not just in the US. Each country that was part of this coalition that was supporting the bombing blockade on Yemen had also activists on the ground involved with their own governments. And that was a really empowering thing. I think more people saw, okay, there's a lot of people behind this. Let's keep up the momentum. So that's just my 2 cents. Thank you.
Well, I will, that was January 2021, where we got people from 400 groups endorse the call to action. There were hundreds of, tens of thousands of people protesting and on an online rally. But that was after the War Powers resolutions were passed. And the reason I highlight this is that numbers do matter, and we did grow to become an international movement. But we can change a lot sometimes with a few people coordinating.
So there's another question here. I'm going to summarize it a little bit. Essentially saying, isn't this a hollow victory because the result is the Saudis stop bombing, then the Houthis close the shipping, and then the US is bombing. And wouldn't the solution be for Yemenis to oust the Houthis? And I think kind of questioning, was this a victory maybe? So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, the sort of next places that this conflict has gone. And Neda, go ahead.
I want to speak a bit to the Houthis, and then Isaac can speak to about the hollow victory idea. But I just want to say that the bombing on Yemen is one thing, and the civil war in Yemen is another thing, and foreign proxies tend to not care about the people that they're bombing in the country, whereas that group is a Yemeni group. They were born and raised in Yemen, and they had long roots in the country. And in the 1960s, they were ousted from Yemen in a revolution. And so the people were then able to work it out among themselves and have a revolution that led to the Democratic Republic of Yemen. And so that was given that the people have come together and form a democracy instead of being bombarded by foreign countries that are bombing indiscriminately schools, hospitals, funerals, weddings, without care for the people in the land. And so I think that the first step for peace in Yemen is for foreign proxies to stop bombing Yemen and stop blockading the key ports and the key lifelines for Yemenis. And then Yemenis can then exercise their self-determination and decide what is the next step for their country. And so that is to the point about, Yemenis forming their own revolution. I think that would be, if that's what the people in Yemen want to do, I think that would be, required through organizing in Yemen. But our advocacy as US residents, people who have members of Congress, would be in advocating for our country to stop bombing already one of the poorest countries in the Middle East, so that we could come to a conclusion in Yemen. And then Isaac can speak to the hollow victory part.
Thanks. I'm chuckling about that phrase because every time that we do something that results in a ceasefire in a country stopping bombing another country, to me is a victory. And what another country might do or other future acts of violence that come later doesn't actually change the fact that we've achieved that victory. So from 2022, April 2022 through December of 2023 of last year, there weren't any foreign countries that were bombing Yemen. That's a victory. That's a good thing. It's a victory that US residents and citizens demanded that their members of Congress uphold the Constitution of this country. It's a victory that our Congress decided to defend their constitutional war power and to actually exercise their duties as elected officials who've sworn to uphold the Constitution of the United States. It's a victory that they decided to do their job. I wish it weren't such a victory. I wish that was just what happened normally, but it's not. Congress has abdicated its responsibility on issues of war and peace for decades. And so when we get our members of Congress to do that, and we press them to do that, and we achieve that success, that's a victory. It's a victory not just for the people who are on the receiving end of the bombings, but it's also a victory for us who get to notice our own power and get to notice, oh, actually, we actually have something to stand on, and that Constitution doesn't just belong to doesn't belong just to some of us, but it's actually all of ours, and we all get to stand up for it. And so, to me, that while there's a whole lot of work left to do, and we're continuing to do it. This summer, we organized a letter that over 50 organizations signed on to in support of a new Yemen War Powers Resolution, one that's focused on the very blatant violation of the U.S. Constitution, with the U.S. all year long bombing Yemen directly. There were Senate and House letters that we supported in January, bipartisan letters in both bodies of Congress, opposing this bombing of Yemen. Just today we were on a call with the congressional office asking them to introduce an Iran War Powers Resolution to prevent wider war with Iran. And we didn't know about that War Powers Resolution until we learned about it in terms of Yemen. So it's a victory when we get to learn and we get to use these tools and remind Congress of them. So I understand this is a time when I feel a lot of despair. Sometimes I feel last night I had a moment where I was freaking out. And, I'm not, there are limitations, right? We haven't won everything. And that's partly why you all are so important and the work that you're doing is so important. But we can notice when we have achieved something and see what we can do to build on those achievements.
Thank you. That was really well said. We're about to wrap up here. Yeah, I really appreciate that. I know, well, in New Hampshire, we worked on the campaign through FCNL and Friends Committee on National Legislation. Chris and I were in many meetings with our reps, and we did convince both of our reps to sign that. And it was literally the last minute, an hour before it closed, that Congressman Pappas signed it. So, and we were on in a meeting with his people an hour before that, so it really, and we've just gone through a year of really intensive work with our representatives and did get them to change their minds on a few things. So, it always feels like too little, too late. It always feels like not enough. And it's just so easy to discount, but I don't think that's helpful, and I don't think it's true. So I appreciate what you said and shared, and I am really encouraging folks to work on noticing when we make progress, and that this can work. We get discouraged and stop doing it before we really get that far, I think, is part of what we're trying to turn around here. Okay, so I have to tell people some other things. I have put in the chat how you can follow Action Corps' amazing work. actioncorps.org is the best way to find more out about them. I want you to also stay in touch with us here at New Hampshire Peace Action. Again, some things in the chat, and for those of you listening elsewhere, nhpeaceaction.org is where you find out about what we have coming up. We also have a Facebook page, but the easiest way is that website. And let me give a quick preview of what is coming up. We have Ceasefire Now vigils. The schedule will be this Wednesday, December 4th, 2 to 3, outside of Representative Pappas's office in Dover. Then on Thursday, December 5, noon to 1, City Plaza, Concord, New Hampshire. The following Wednesday, December 11, 2 to 3, we will be at Senator Shaheen's Dover office, and that is going to be a big thank you visit. So that will be interesting and fun for us. Beyond the vigils, I want you to know that Tuesday, December 10th at 6:30 p.m., the film Where the Olive Trees Weep will be shown at 3S Art Space in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, followed by a discussion led by Not in My Name, New Hampshire. And our next online Peace and Justice conversations will be 2 weeks from today, Monday, December 16 at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. And we're going to have a participant conversation on the topic of the media, staying informed while staying sane. It won't be recorded. Sandra Yarney and myself will lead it, and we'll talk about how to deal with, not so much in this case, how to change the media, but how to deal with learning without getting overwhelmed. Let me also let you know that this series is free. It will remain so, but your support means a lot to us. There is our donate, nhpeaceaction.org/donate. And with all of that business out of the way, let's take a moment and have a very visible thank you to Neda and Isaac for joining us, for telling us about the work they're doing, and for the work itself, which is just so important and needed these days. Thank you.
Thanks everyone for showing up and for
Thanks,
watching.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Good night, everyone. See